Getting a story out of your head and onto the page is a huge achievement, but writing does not end there. Very few stories cannot be improved from when you first wrote them. I'm hoping that you've already been through the first steps to editing your novel. Let's recap. Step 1, celebrate and take a break. Put it away for a while so you can come back to it with fresh eyes. Step 2, pour yourself a big mug of tea, probably several, and add biscuits to that, and read it analytically. Make notes about what the reader discovers in each chapter and how the story and characters move on. Which steps move the story closer towards resolution and which create more problems and move resolution further away. Step 3, identify where the weaknesses in the story are so that you can work out how to make improvements. Look at structure, plot, tone, characterization, and narrative drive. Drink more tea. Step 4, redraft and produce a much improved second draft. This brings us to step 5. And reaching step 5 means you're nearly there. There are smaller and smaller steps ahead that you need to do. These early steps of the editing process are what I think of as using a pair of scissors and not being afraid to cut or chop things up and move them around. I received a great tip that really helped me with the pain of deleting words that I had worked hard to write. Instead of pressing delete, I paste everything into a document called something like cuttings, which kind of tricks me into thinking it was so great when I wrote it that I'm bound to find room for it somewhere. Tip, this is just a trick because this file always ends up really long and I maybe have to dive into it for about 1 paragraph per book that I really suddenly miss. By the end of my second draft, I need to be happy with the characters, a setting that works for the story, and have done world building. I need to check I have a logical and satisfying plot that I am satisfied with. I check that I have come up with challenges and obstacles and ways my characters overcome these to make a strong arc and will feel logical and satisfying to the reader. All plot holes eliminated. I have gone back and foreshadowed things to maximise tension and made sure plots and subplots are tied up. If I'm not happy with all of these important story elements, I do a second draft, part B. Only then, when I'm happy with all the big picture stuff, do I turn to looking at things you can only really address once you've got your basic structure right. A third draft is often called the line edit. Now I am thinking more in terms of using a scalpel and doing gentle changes rather than snipping away with scissors. But it's still surprising how much things do change. Some bits can get cut, but also some bits feel like they need more or rephrasing to give more impact or meaning. I can tell you the bits I always find I need to work on, and I suggest you look at these too. I really struggle with openings. Once I get going, the writing seems to flow better. I've learned not to sweat over my opening too early because I have a much better idea of how to open once I've reached draft 3. By now, I usually know where my story needs to start, but there's always so much I want to say. I want my readers to be grabbed by the wonderful adventure they're about to embark on. So, what is your first chapter for, and what are you trying to achieve with it? Those opening pages are so critical, I absolutely sweat over them. The opening chapter is often described as the hook. I think of it as making a promise to my reader about the story to come. I make sure my opening contains hints of the most important elements of the story that the reader needs to know. Here is my first chapter ingredients checklist. Where is the novel set? Historical, fantasy, contemporary? Who is the main character and what are they facing? A glimpse of the past that is directly relevant to the main action. Set the tone. Is it a thriller, a comedy? Can I identify the hook? Is what is here strong enough to make the reader interested and curious enough to read on? So yes, the first chapter is tough. Another thing I struggle with is pacing. Pace is not just about action and things happening in a breathless race. I think pace is making sure you never lose your grip on the reader, and you do that by making them care enough about the story to want to move on. Pace does refer to forward action, but between your big waypoints in your plot, there can be time for subplots to develop, which makes for a richer reader experience and I think makes them care more. Giving your reader time to breathe is good and can also give space for your characters to develop as the tension begins to crank up again. Another tip is that I like to give my main character 6 things to care about. So it's not just the main plot. These can be major or minor. It's maybe an inner turmoil issue, a conflict with other characters, or external conflicts, even needing a drink of water. Pace is usually what you have in the moment in each scene that keeps the reader interested and wanting to read on, and making sure something advances. So in draft 3, I look at things like, are there plot points or characters that are undervalued that I can use to crank up reader involvement? Once I'm happy with the overall structure, I am looking for balance in all the story elements. The clearer you can be about what's the most crucial and relevant about your story can help you take out the stuff that doesn't advance the action, or tell us about character, or fill in background, or create atmosphere. If it doesn't do any of these things, what is it doing there? Draft 3 is where I usually ask myself these questions. Have I created any setups that I haven't made pay off later that could add depth and intrigue and keep the reader hooked? Sometimes, if you write complicated stories like I do, I weave in all sorts of intrigue and there can be a lot going on, too much, leaving some bits of the story underdeveloped. I try to keep it to 6 things, and this is where I look at where I can make the most of what I have. What else do I know I struggle with that I will look for in draft 3? I am terrible at repeating things because I am worried my readers won't understand. I have a tendency to do this in my early drafts and I try to trim. Cutting where you can leaves you more freedom to develop the bits that really are working. Another area that can be ripe for a trim is description. Description is essential so that your readers can visualize where your story is happening. How much do you really need? I try to avoid the tendency to drop description in chunks. The same can happen with backstory. I love backstory, but I try not to let it get in the way of forward action. And if it's there, it has to add meaning. I identify anywhere I'm giving detailed explanations in indigestible chunks because these are the bits readers might feel they can skip. Readers will skip. I try to make sure every line is adding to the story or character. I work at finding a leaner, more engaging way of doing it. I look at where I can give description added meaning by making sure it's seen through the voice of a character That's also helping develop that character. I try hard to get into a habit of describing things in a memorable way the first time you meet a character or scene. Then I try to find one or two telling phrases to bring it in again when we meet that scene or character again. This minimises holding up the action with repetition. Can I leave more for the reader to work out for themselves? That can be a more economical way to get the same information across and doesn't stop forward flow. But there's no easy way to get this right. It's mostly about practice, although reading a lot helps. What else do I look for? All sorts of nasties creep into my initial drafts. I'm a shocker for using filter words. I look out for things like saw, think, look, hear, touch, smell, taste, wonder, because you are telling the reader something, and this puts up a barrier between the character and the reader. Now is the time to get rid of lines like, I saw that the door to the kitchen was open and wondered if I should walk in, but hesitated, thinking that it was a bad idea because I felt nervous. That's fine for a first draft. It conveys all the information you want, but hopefully in a line edit you can redo. How about, overcoming my nerves and unsure what I was walking into, I crept into the kitchen. I often get tempted to describe how characters react to each other and what's being said. By draft 3, you should have built your characters well enough and drawn your readers into the action, so you don't need to spell out how they feel or react. If you feel the need to launch into a lengthy explanation about how someone reacts, thrilled, horrified to something, then the problem is probably somewhere else in the story, not that particular scene. Readers quite like to know characters well enough to actually predict how they're going to react. And in life, we don't do all that much nodding and shrugging and shaking of heads. If a character says, yep, okay, we'll do it, you don't have to write, yeah, okay, we'll do it, she nodded. And you could possibly do a search on the number of times you use linking words, all those ands and buts. See how many that's you can get rid of. All of this is fine-tuning with a scalpel, and you are soon ready for the final step. Yes, you are nearly there.